Hi there, and welcome to Out There, a Cryptid podcast. I'm Trevor, and today I want you to close your eyes and picture the place you would go if there was a medical emergency. Most likely you thought about a hospital or ER, which are meant to be places of healing. But some never let go of the souls that come through their halls. We are reading some of the creepiest Reddit stories that take place in these places. From shadowy figures lurking in abandoned wings, to whispers echoing in empty rooms. These stories will make you think twice about walking alone at night, whether you're a skeptic or a believer. One thing is certain. Some patients never leave. Let's dive in. Now, I wanted to address, in the Watcher episode, we did something a little different. We used a special effect on my voice to add an eerie vibe to the stories, and we know it might have been a little tricky to understand. So, to make sure nobody misses out on what was said, we've added the transcript of all of those letters in the episode description, so you can follow along if needed. This is going to be another one of those episodes where we're reading the stories for the first time, so you're getting the real unfiltered reactions right after each one. Also, if you love these themed Reddit episodes, let us know in the comments, on Discord, or even comment on Instagram what themes you would like to see next. Now, let's see how far I can make it through without totally creeping myself out. We'll get into the haunted hospitals Reddit stories right after this. This story from the user Bella Moonbeam. Here is something paranormal that happened to me as a patient in an ward that I had worked in previously. I posted this several days ago. Paranormal doesn't necessarily mean that something is scary or ghostly. It just means that it is something out of the normal range of things. I died twice after being hit head-on by a drunk driver while on my way to work at 7:30 a.m. My body was badly damaged, but my biggest fear was that they were going to shave my head because of the cut that went from the corner of my left eye to the top of my skull. I had a wonderful plastic surgeon, and they didn't cut my hair, but my super long hair was caked and crusty with dried blood. It was so gross. I was in no shape to be getting in the shower for quite some time, however. I promise there is nothing in my experience like hell on earth than your body being so broken and being trapped in a hospital bed in an ICU, and your mind being so clear and bored. There are no TVs in ICU, at least not back then. I was laying there, staring at the ceiling, trying not to cry in despair, when one of the nurses comes in with all this stuff. She said since it was 3 a.m. and quiet, she was going to wash my hair to get the blood out. She had it down to a science, too. I don't see how I wasn't soaked or the floor wasn't soaked. It would have been had I been doing the hair washing. We made small talk. She told me her name, that she worked mostly weekend nights. But after all these years, I forgot her name. But I will never forget her kindness and feeling of comfort I had in her presence. I thanked her repeatedly. What I didn't say when I started telling this is that I worked at the hospital where I arrived in the ambulance. A few months go by. I'm back at work, limping around, and I make frequent trips a day to the area near the ICU for my job in histology. So I keep sticking my head in the door of the ICU in hopes of seeing this wonderful person, so I can tell her how much of a difference she made. It was way more than simply washing my hair. I don't see her. I decided to leave a thank you card for her at the nurse's station in the ICU. A few weeks pass, and the card is still there. So, I think perhaps I had the wrong name. I ask the nurses and describe her. They don't know her. It's driving me crazy not to say thank you one more time because it meant so much. My dad worked nights as the security shift supervisor, so I get him involved in the search. Everyone loved him, and he knew everyone. He is not shy about asking after this great person. The nursing supervisors are also interested in thanking someone who went to the extra mile for a patient, especially for one of their own. No one knew this person, remembered working with her, hired her, etc. So they asked the nurses who were working that night who washed my hair. And they said they hadn't and probably wouldn't start something like that because they would never know if there would be time to finish it. Someone always had to watch the monitors, and all of the patients need so much care. Yet still my hair was washed. It's a secure area, so some random nurse didn't just pop in off one of the wards to wash my hair. I don't know what else to think, but that she was/is my guardian angel. Anyway, wherever she is, I hope she knows the comfort she gave me, aside from getting the blood out of my hair. It made a huge difference to me, and I have tried giving some of that comfort to others since. It is my way of thanking her to pass it on. Draw your own conclusion. If my dad couldn't track this employee down, I don't think she was an employee. I do believe in angels now, and I believe there is way more out there than most humans are aware of. Occasionally, we get a glimpse of those things, and our logical minds tend to want to explain away things that we don't understand, rather than accepting it for what it is. Now, this story is just so interesting. Like, the idea of guardian angels are something that is really interesting to me. Like, there is a spirit out there. It could be a family member or just somebody that's really connected to you. And they come to you at your lowest point, your time of need, and they help you. And then they just disappear. I think that's just so fascinating. Like, whatever it is. Our second story comes from the user Wild Croutons. Not very exciting, but when I worked in the ER, there was a back section of rooms that we would typically shut down at a certain point if we weren't having a busy night. That section also had room 35, which was the room that we would move deceased patients to before they were taken by the morgue or funeral home workers, mainly because it was in the back, out of the way, and as private as we could achieve in the ER. That back section always creeped me out, but especially room 35. One night, I was restocking supplies in room number 35, alone in the back section. I saw a man walk by the room out of the corner of my eye and quickly popped my head in the hallway to redirect him. He was headed towards an employee-only set of doors that required badging through. Nobody was there. My stomach dropped. I told myself I was tired, overworked, seeing things, but I decided it was time to dip out. I went back to the main ER, and within about 5 minutes, we all hear a scream. One of the nurses had gone to the back section and came sprinting back towards us, totally spooked. She said she saw a man out of the corner of her eye, and as she turned to look, she felt someone grab her shoulder. She thought someone was going to attack her and screamed, but there was nobody there. We watched the security footage multiple times, and it didn't capture any man, entity, ghost, or anything. But watching the nurse's reaction on camera and after, I believed her. She was terrified. Now, I just got chills reading that one. I have personal experiences working in hospitals, and there was a section of the hospital I worked in that was exactly this. It wasn't like an ER section or anything. I think it was like the surgery wing where they put people in after surgery so they can like recover and everything. But there was always like nobody there. So it always gave this like eerie feeling of like there should be people here. And like there wasn't, but there was always the feeling that there was something in those rooms. I don't know, it's really weird. The next story is from Luna 1219. I was doing a night shift with a new grad, orientating her to night shift. We were alone in the department, and when I had started my shift, I had done my usual routine of checking/locking every door except for the one I'd bring patients through. There was no way for someone to enter the department without me seeing them walk past me. It was a quiet night, and at like 3 a.m., me and the new grad were sitting just chatting when we both heard an elderly voice say, "Hello? Help me." The voice sounded a bit far away, like down the hall in one of the exam rooms. My hair stood on end. We both looked at each other and asked if we had both heard the same thing. We went together and double-checked all the rooms in the department, but no one was there, and all the doors were still locked. I don't know how wise to explain it besides it being paranormal, especially since we've had both heard it. There wasn't any ER or inpatient rooms nearby where sound could have carried from either. The area we heard the voice from had always given me weird vibes. Another hospital I worked at had a ghost that was caught on camera. He's in the reflection of a dark computer screen. He was a tall, elderly, and in a gown and housecoat. Creepy part was, his eyes just looked like black pits. Yeah, so, same thing. It's like, there's such a weird energy off of these stories. I don't know if that's just me in the way that I'm spiritually inclined, that I just feel the vibe of these stories. I know that I talked about that kind of stuff in the previous Weird Club episode that we all did, and how like the Ammons haunting house, just by looking at it, I got like such a weird feeling. And it's the same thing with these stories. Like, it's hard to explain, but like you feel the presence of something there. The fourth story comes from either_tap2827. Not my story, but my immensely down-to-earth mother's. She worked as a night nurse in the same tiny hospital in Scotland for many years. This place was old, at least Victorian, or maybe older. She told me the place had a few ghosts. The story I loved most as a kid was the wee girl in the red dressing gown with blonde hair that liked to turn up next to patients' beds in the middle of the night. She did this to so many different people. They would see her. She would turn and run out of the room, and they would buzz for my mum to tell her that there was a child out of bed. They never knew she was a ghost. She was never frightening, and my mum would never let on. Just thank them for letting her know, say she would find her and put her back to bed. Thing is, she and all the other nurses knew that if you saw her, it was because you were on your way out. And sure enough, the next day, or next night at the latest, the patient that saw her would die. I always thought she was kind of a guide to lead them into spirit like she was. Like she had a very specific job to do, and she took it very seriously because it happened over and over again. Now, this is another insane story. So having that little girl be like the tell that somebody is about to pass on is weird, yet kind of comforting in a way. She's kind of a spirit guide, or whatever you would call it. somebody that helps another spirit go to the other side. And I think that's really cool. The next story is from Cemetery Dweller 7719. I knew 2 different people that worked at the same hospital about 20 years apart. The one lady I'd lost touch with, and she was close to retirement when I'd lost touch with her, and she didn't work there when my friend worked there. They both worked in the kitchen of this really old hospital. It originally was a sanitarium for TB patients, and it even had a cemetery on the grounds for patients that died there while it was a sanitarium. By the time they worked there, it was a rehabilitation hospital. Both of them talked about having to be at work very early to start food prep, and there would be noises, banging on the metal prep tables when no one was around them, banging on the metal roll-down doors that closed off the food service area when they were closed. It would be super early in the morning, so almost no one in the hospital would be around to be pulling pranks. And who would do that for decades? They both just treated it as something you had to just get used to having happen. They didn't work there at the same time or know each other, so it wouldn't have been feasible for them to concoct the tale together. Short of a giant conspiracy for kitchen staff to claim weird noises when no one was around. Odd that they'd describe the same things. The hospital has since closed due to people breaking in to explore. The city had the building torn down. The cemetery exists, but the buildings are gone. Property continues to be monitored by police, and the no trespassing is heavily enforced. Now, this just sounds like some typical spirit stuff. Some of them just like to play jokes, And I also worked in the kitchen of a hospital, so I can also vouch that some weird stuff does happen in the kitchens of hospitals. I don't know what it is about them. More on the haunted hospital Reddit stories right after this. This next story comes from the user Bill_N_Opus. Long time ago, I was working on a geriatric unit, and we found one of our patients had just expired right after shift change. Called a code blue, but unfortunately it was not successful. We did our best to carry on with our morning routine while we had the medical response team dealing with the situation. It was pretty sad, and most of the residents had an idea what was happening. 11 o'clock came, and it was my lunch break, so I decided to go down to the cafeteria in the basement to grab some food, usually a sandwich and some soup. I ran into a friend of mine who was working on the unit above me and asked him how he was doing. Keep in mind that he was not aware of the code blue that we had just experienced. He proceeded to tell me that he had just witnessed something really weird in the morning just after shift change. He said that right after shift change, he went out into the hallway, and he claims he saw a naked guy walk/run from one of the separate rooms into the linen room, which was directly across the hallway. He went to check it out, and of course, he found nothing. He swore that he saw something, and it bothered him. I told him about our code blue, and then we realized that the patient's room was directly below the area where my friend had seen the naked guy. Same time. Usually my friend is quite the joker, and he's usually never serious, but he was pretty serious this time, in a bit of a shock. Strange. Again, this is some really sadly typical stuff. It seems that a lot of the times in these situations that these spirits are stuck there for some time, and they're of course scared, so they don't know what to do, and that would account for seeing the man just running. Like, he doesn't know what's going on, so he was just trying to get out, and that's terrifying. Our sixth story is from the user Plane_Possession972. I was wheeling a trolley of paperwork down the hallway. I saw a woman standing in the hall. There was no one else around. Very rare. And the second I saw her, I got goosebumps on my arms. She wasn't moving. She didn't look like she was lost. She was just standing there, looking at nothing, I guess. There was just a wall there. We made eye contact as I walked past her, and I swear I had felt heat leaving my body. That's the best way I can explain it. I heard behind me the sound of shuffling, and I looked back to see her now really slowly moving to follow me in the direction I went. I said to myself I'd ask her if she was okay after I dropped off the paperwork to the office, which was right around the corner from the hallway I saw her in. Here's the thing. I came back out of the office 30 seconds after I saw that woman, and she was nowhere to be found. There was nowhere she could have gone in that short amount of time, especially considering how slowly I saw her walking. She would have only made it a few meters in the time it took me to go into the office and come back out. I saw a nurse in that corridor on my way back and asked her if she saw the woman. She said no, and she said she didn't see anyone matching her description. The corridor didn't feel cold anymore as I made my way back, and I haven't seen that woman in the hours since. My coworkers think that I just imagined her, but the goosebumps and the cold sinking feeling when we made eye contact were real. I think a hospital of all places would be where you'd see a ghost. I've been working here for a year, but this was the first experience I had that made me think, is that really a ghost? I have no explanation for this. There was nowhere that woman could have gone where I wouldn't have seen her, especially at the speed she was going. This happened hours ago, but I'm still spooked. Now, this is something I can actually talk about. Being spiritually inclined like I am, I have had this kind of experience before. Not to the extent of seeing a spirit, but just the feeling of something is there, and you feel a difference in the pressure and the feeling around you. Like, for me, as an example, if I feel a spirit around me, it feels like everything goes quiet, and there's a sense of calmness, and then you feel the chill, and then you get the goosebumps. And depending on the intention of the spirit, these things can change, but it feels about the same. And honestly, that it's such a hard experience, like hard feeling to explain, but I think this story gives a pretty good explanation of it. This story is from Spiritual House 5494. When I was 19, I got shot while walking to the gas station. I died on the operating table and was resuscitated. Upon awakening in the ICU after that initial emergency surgery, I saw a dark, shadowy figure at the foot of my bed, next to my mom. It appeared to be wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a coat with a tall collar. It had no distinguishable features aside from those. I tried to point at it, but I was restrained because I started ripping out my tubes coming out of anesthesia. I asked, "Who's that?" as I continued to point. My mom got that weird feeling that would make her eyes go wide and give her goosebumps. Something I had seen before as a kid. I used to see spirits. I could see her feel the chill go up her spine as she straightened and turned to look where I was pointing. It's just me and the nurse, honey." As I had asked my question, I remembered that nobody else would be able to see him. And as my mother spoke, he tipped his hat to me and disappeared. Fast forward a few days, They're preparing me for another surgery in my room. I guess the ORs were overbooked, so they were trying to save time. The two ladies that were there left my room to attend to other matters. Leaving one guy, I hear him tell the others, "Go on ahead, I got him." He begins pushing me to the OR by himself. It's nighttime, and the hospital is all but empty. Each hallway was bare as could be, save for random singles, all in a hurry to get where they're going. Then, we turn one corner, and the hallway's lined with people. Only one guy in a lab coat, and a couple in scrubs. The rest were all plain clothed. The medical personnel were talking and looking at each other. The rest, probably about 20 or so, all turned to look at me simultaneously. They were lining both sides of the hallway as I was being pushed down the middle. They all stared directly at me as we passed each one. "Who are all these people?" I asked. Again, as I asked my question, I realized the answer, as I began to notice they were all translucent. The guy pushing me confirms, "It's just me and you, buddy." Now, I have an explanation for the start, and I think you guys already know where this one's going. That description is very reminiscent of our friend the Hat Man. Now, I don't know why he would be seeing him in this situation, but he likes to show up in really interesting places, so I wouldn't put it past him to just be there. Now, as for the last part, I really don't know what that could mean. Like, that is really, really weird. I've never seen or heard something like that, but maybe it's all the spirits of people who have passed on from the same kind of thing, just trying to comfort him as he's going for another surgery. Our next story is from the user VC Daisy. I had trained as a registered nurse, SRN, and registered midwife, SCM, some years before this experience. As a UK practicing midwife, you had to take a refresher course every 5 years to maintain registration. I had a longer break than that whilst I had my son, then left a dreadful marriage and then moved to a new area. I'd applied to 2 different hospitals to undergo the 12-week extended refresher course and had received a phone call to say a place was available at one of them, starting in a few days' time. I was nervous about the drive to the city, as I had never done it before. My then BF, now husband, said we'd try the route on the day before the course was starting. It was a Sunday. The drive was straightforward enough. We found the maternity unit of a very Victorian-looking hospital, which had some modern wings. Just as we turned into the car park, I had an overwhelming feeling I'd been before, and I was terrified of the place. Such a strong fear of death and feeling of dread. I didn't see anything, but burst into tears. Trying to explain it was difficult, but the worst feeling I've ever had, and couldn't get away from there fast enough. We didn't even stop, just turned around and drove away. I couldn't explain it then, and still can't, 25 plus years later. I didn't do the course there, and after I did complete it at another hospital, I decided not to go back into that profession. Something was clearly telling me not to take that place at the hospital. I changed career into administration, still in hospitals, but smaller and nearer home. This is crazy. There could be a couple explanations for it. Maybe, and just maybe, she could be feeling some kind of residual energy from a past life, or some kind of reincarnation effect. Maybe in her past life, something had happened, and she may have died at that hospital, or something may have happened to her in or around that place. And or it was a very baseline premonition. Like just the feeling of something is going to happen, and you don't know why or what. And that's really terrifying. The 9th story comes from Vegemite Bikkie. When my dad was very sick in the hospital last October, we knew it was serious, but didn't know he was actively dying. Doctors and nurses couldn't tell us if he was when we kept asking. He was in delirium with sepsis and was so sweaty. He kept asking me to wind the window down, like in a car. Unfortunately, in Australia, or maybe it's just our hospital, they replaced all the old windows that used to open with fully sealed ones. I wonder if spirits are still trapped up there on the top floor. The whole level felt suffocating. Anyway, the night before he passed, my sister was sitting with him, and he suddenly looked over her shoulder at something or someone and said, "I'm going to heaven." He passed 12 hours later, on Friday the 13th, October. He was very staunch in his belief that when you're dead, you're dead. That's all there is, his whole life. So it was really shocking when I heard he'd say that. I carry so much guilt still. The night before he passed, a little voice in my head said, "Go see Dad and settle him into bed." I'd been doing that on and off for 3 weeks straight at that point, and had planned to get up early and spend the entire next day with him. So I shut that little voice down and said, "Don't wear yourself out. You'll see him all day tomorrow." Then tomorrow never came. Oh, and he begged me not to let him die up there and made me promise. And I did. I feel so much anger at myself for letting him down and not listening to my intuition. I keep asking him to visit me in my dreams, but he hasn't. Mom has seen his ghost twice at home. Both times his apparition was standing by her bed in the mist looking over her. When she reached out to hold his hand, he disappeared from the knees up. The last time she spoke to him, but can't remember what she said, or if he spoke back. I don't even know what to say here. This is such a sad story. Like, nobody knows how to process the loss of a parent, and to have to do that and carry a sort of guilt that you pushed out the intuition voice in your head saying go to see them now, and then not being able to is very, very hard. Number 10 comes from 3D's mom. Things happen when you least expect it. I was working in a busy ER one night about 2.5 years ago and was taking a patient back to their room after having a CT exam done. Their room was up in the front of the ER, right beside the EMT entrance. The main nurse's station was just outside their door. Like I said, it was hopping that night. Lots of people around just outside the room. I started backing the patient's stretcher into their empty room when I felt something run itself up the middle of my back. It had enough pressure behind it that I stopped and turned to look over my shoulder. My first thought was that maybe there was something hanging from the ceiling and I was just backing into it. It moved up my back. Sometimes fluids are hung from the adjustable light that sit over where the stretcher is parked. But no, nothing was there. I was literally only 3 to 4 feet into the room, and the stretcher was still sticking out of the doorway. There was nothing hanging in the room regardless. We were super, busy, so I just shrugged my shoulder, got the patient situated, and hooked back up to vitals, and went on my way. It wasn't until later that I really thought more about it. What was that? It literally felt like someone ran their finger up the middle of my back. I'm glad we were so busy, and I had other things going on, so that I didn't dwell on it in the moment, because I probably would have freaked. I've had people tell me that they don't open themselves up to spirits, so they never experience anything. But I'm here to tell you, it doesn't matter. I was in the middle of a busy shift, and this happened out of nowhere. I can't explain it, but that's my story. This is an interesting story. I know I say that for everyone, but it's hard to explain these kind of things. Like, I know these feelings all very well because I've been through these kind of things. But to try and explain it to somebody that hasn't or doesn't believe in this kind of thing is very, very hard. And like he said, there are some people that don't open themselves up to spirits, so they don't experience anything. But that's not how that works. Anybody can experience the feeling of being in the presence of a spirit. It's just if you choose to keep accepting that there's nothing out there that will keep you from still seeing them. I don't know if that made sense, but that's kind of how I'm looking at this. This next story comes from organized_wanderer 15. I used to be a travel nurse and was working in a hospital in another state. There was one main desk with 8 rooms circling it, so each room was visible from behind the desk. Since it was a small unit, there were usually only 2 of us at night. One of the rooms directly across from the desk was rarely used since kids would scream and cry every time they were in there, complaining of an old man staring at them from the rocking chair. We would try to keep that room empty. The chair would rock when the room was empty, and sometimes the monitor would start beeping as it turned on. Another night I went to hang an antibiotic in one of my rooms. It was about 2 a.m. It was a fairly large room, since it had a bed for parents to sleep in behind a curtain. I was at the computer chatting with the curtain closed behind me. I purposely did not turn on the lights, since the computer screen did a pretty good job of illuminating the room, and my patient was fast asleep to the left of me. All of a sudden, something came out from behind me and hit the wall right in front of me. It was a syringe, still in the packaging. I hightailed it out of there and refused to go into any more rooms alone for the rest of my assignment. Now, this is, typical spirit stuff. They tend to like, at least some spirits do, to make themselves known. And the way a lot of them can do that is by moving small and lightweight objects like a syringe in the packaging. And maybe he just wanted to be seen again. They don't put anybody in the room anymore, so he might have gotten lonely or just wanted to have somebody notice him again. This next story is from mobile_company 9554. I worked trauma ICU for years. As you can imagine, we saw horrific and heartbreaking situations. We saw many deaths that were unexpected. I worked a night shift mostly. On this occasion, it was a middle-aged woman who was run over by a train. Surgery was attempted, but she ultimately succumbed to her injuries when she was in the ICU. My coworker and I were doing post-mortem care. We were cleaning her up the best we could before bagging the body to take her down to the morgue. This room had large windows. I remember looking outside to the city skyline as my coworker was tying on the toe tag. There was a figure standing between us in the window reflection. I remember blinking a few times, thinking maybe my eyes were misinterpreting the reflection of my coworker and I. But there she was, a woman that looked just like the patient, standing in between us. She was moving her shoulders, like she was sobbing. My coworker noticed me looking out the window and looked for herself. I could also see her blinking, trying to make sense of what she saw. We then turned to each other as to see if we could see something physically standing between us. We saw nothing and turned back to the window reflection. The figure was gone. We took a break in postmortem care after that. Now, this one is just sad. Like, they recognized the spirit of the deceased woman weeping over her own body, and that is just so sad. Like, it's hard to explain the feeling that would give somebody. More on the haunted hospital Reddit stories right after this. This story is from the user Nukin Duke. I'll share one of my mom. My mom used to be a CNA at a facility for those with special needs and those who have acute care needs. The facility was decades old. My mom used to work on the new, at the time, children's unit. Sometimes she floated to where the long-term patients were. Near the long-term patients area, you could go outside and access the main lobby from behind. That area had all the HVAC stuff and whatnot. Boilers, you name it. Near those rooms was access to an elevator. The elevator goes to a defunct and abandoned portion of the facility that was the old children's unit back in the early 1900s. Security guards avoided going into that area behind the lobby and near the exit at all costs because it freaked everyone out. As a kid, I passed by it once or twice and have never seen an elevator look ominous. I could swear that Silent Hill 4, the room, took inspiration from it because it just gave off some weird vibes. My mom and a few of her coworkers told me that sometimes it smells like baby powder in that corridor, and other times it smells like a fire, as if wood were burning. There was an incident there decades ago that killed a few of the child residents from a small fire. My mom was asked to grab an item from that corridor on a random night. Pretty sure it was some old document in a file box. Not keen on the why. She was a bit apprehensive as, again, the whole area just seemed completely off. There was no lighting in the room, aside from the elevator opening and closing. She told me that the elevators would only work half the time, and when they worked, the doors opening always smelled like something was burning. She got the files she needed and told me she was stuck for around 10 minutes before the elevator decided to work. She pressed the button and the elevator was just unresponsive. The crazy part is that she told me there was a phone ringing in the room. Not a modern phone, but one of those old rotary ones from decades long past. She told me she answered the phone and only heard static and something indistinguishable. You couldn't even really make out what was being said, but it definitely wasn't all static. She went on the elevator and everyone downstairs could hear the phone still ringing. Maintenance and facilities went into a panic. Allegedly, there was no electricity in that room and had been gutted. Breakers were off and nothing should have been active. That shouldn't have been possible since, bearing the elevator, that room had been without electricity for 20 years, and people didn't even know the ringing they heard was a phone upstairs, simply because it never happened. I really don't know how to explain this one. I'm getting chills with every one of these stories. I don't know if that's just my spiritual intuition kicking in, or the fact that it's 2:30 in the morning when I'm recording this, but all of these stories have such an interesting feel to them, and I really don't know how to explain it. Our last story comes from the user Sanguinius. My mom was a 45-year career midwife, retired 2 years ago, who started her training as a nurse intern at a hospital here in Australia during the 70s. She has a bunch of weird stories. In her particular ward, a lot of patients, including the doctors and nurses, reported seeing a woman who looked like a matron in old clothes walking around. She'd walked through closed double ward doors in the hallways, apparently. She said that one morning she was doing her rounds, and a new mother asked who the lovely nurse with the funny hat was that came around in the middle of the night. Mum asked, "Funny hat?" And the patient described to a T the weird flying nun style hat that nurses wore in the 50s. Apparently this woman woke in the middle of the night to see this nurse checking her chart at the foot of her bed. She said the woman smiled at her, patted her leg, and she went back to sleep. Mom also said that they heard a baby wailing from the nursery on the baby monitor in the ward office, and by the time they walked down to the nursery to check in on the babies, they would find all of them tucked in and asleep, as if someone had settled the baby in the interim. This happened regularly, apparently. I was in the Navy, and late at night, the team on the bridge would often just talk about absolute nonsense in the middle of the late hours in the middle of the ocean. One of my sailors had been a hospital wardsman in his previous career, and told us the story of how a bunch of young nurses and wardies decided to do a seance for laughs in one of the old abandoned wards after hours. Anyway, as he described it, a bunch of about 7 of them sat in an older ward room and pulled out a Ouija board. He thought it was all a joke and was very skeptical, until something apparently came through on the board that he couldn't explain. After some gibberish, the planchette kept moving from letter to letter, and they asked the person who was scribing the answers down what it was saying. Exasperated, he said this guy writing the letters down exclaimed, "It keeps saying, 'Kill baby Cassie. Kill baby Cassie.' Or is it, 'Cassie kill baby'?" At this comment, one of the nurses screamed and went running out of the room, howling inconsolably. One of the girls followed her to find out what was going on. Turned out this girl was called Cassandra, or Cassie, and she had an abortion 2 weeks prior that she told no one about, only her boyfriend at the time, not even her parents or closest friends. Nope, nope, nope. Now, I'm not gonna get into this because I don't believe in pushing the use of Ouija boards or other items like this, because they are not safe. And if you do not know how to use these objects, they can get you into a lot of bad positions. So please, if you do want to do these kind of things, please, please, please do your research and be safe if you do. So, what do you think? Are ghosts really out there? Be sure to follow us on Instagram at OutThereCryptids for episode posts, updates, and more. Join our community on Discord, where we dive even deeper into the mysteries we explore here on the podcast. The link can be found on our Instagram. And if you're loving the show, consider supporting us on Patreon. As a patron, you will get exclusive perks like bonus episodes, early access, and even surprises. See you next week.